And so, I think I'm excited to have you here to speak a little bit more about, your work and specifically around soul and leadership and whatnot. So let me share a little bit about your background, and then I would love for you to share a little bit about these topics. Deepak Chopra is an Indian American author, alternative medicine advocate, and prominent figure in the New Age movement. Dr. Chopra began his career as a physician, graduating from AIMS in India, and then completing residencies in internal medicine and endocrinology. Dr. Chopra became interested in alternative medicine and Ayurvedic practices, leading him to establish the Maharishi Ayurveda Health Center. He is the founder of the Chopra Foundation and the co-founder of the Chopra Center for Well-Being, promoting integrative medicine and personal transformation. He's authored over 90 books, many of which have become international bestsellers, covering topics such as spirituality, alternative medicine, and personal development. And he's won awards such as the Time 100 Most Influential People, Einstein Humanitarian Awards, and several others. So we're very, very excited to have you, Dr. Chopra, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about, your thoughts on soul and leadership to kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Chirag, and thanks everyone for joining. I'll start with a little background on why I think this topic, soul of leadership, is crucial for our times. And then we can go into any other queries you might have about mind-body medicine, integrative medicine, spirituality, self-awareness, AI, and whatever else you might have in your mind. So let me start with a little background. When I was growing up in India, and I grew up all my high school and school years in India, pre-med in India, medical school in India. I came to the United States at the age of 23 after having finished medical school. And then as you just heard, I trained in internal medicine, endocrinology, neuroscience, neuroendocrinology, and got into what we now call mind, body, and integrative medicine. But then as I pursued that, it became obvious to me that our current scientific model does not address fundamental reality. What is fundamental reality? What is the universe made of? That's the number one open question in science right now. There are about 125 open questions that are published by Science Magazine every few years. And the number one question still remains, what is the universe made of? And you would think we know the answer: force fields, gravity, electromagnetism, atoms, molecules, and so forth. I'll share with you towards the end why I think that is actually a totally inaccurate model. And then the number two question in science right now is, what is the biological basis of what we call consciousness? So first of all, we have to define what consciousness is. And I think the simplest definition of consciousness is that which allows us to have experience, any experience, mental experience, perceptual experience, emotional experience. So consciousness is the source of all experience, and it's the source of our experience of our body and our mind and what we call the physical world. And so the second most important question, what's the biological basis of consciousness, is equally relevant, because if you want to know the nature of the universe, we have to ask, first of all, who's asking, and what is the consciousness in which these ideas come, where our theories conceived, where our theories examined, where our experiments examined, where our observations occurring. So I'll come to that towards the end. But I thought, for this very young audience that I see all of you seem to be in your younger years, I would say in the first quarter of your life. I happen to be in the last quarter of my life. So as I see this audience, I think it's very relevant to look at what we call the history of civilization. Mahatma Gandhi was once asked the question, "What do you think of Western civilization?" And he responded by saying, "I think it's a good idea," uh, which is very relevant right now when we talk about civilization. It's a good idea. But, also when Indira Gandhi was growing up and her father, Pandit Nehru, was in a prison during British colonialism, he sent her lots of letters, young lady without a father in absentia who is in prison because of British colonialism. And he wrote a series of letters to his daughter about what civilization could mean. And so while we use this word, we have to look at the world very honestly. Right now, if we look at the world very honestly, we see climate change, unless you're a climate change denier. We see an unsustainable planet. We see social and economic unrest and injustice. We see racism and bigotry and hatred across the board. We see wars, terrorism, and we see absence of joy and a pandemic of chronic stress and depression. I don't know if you're aware of, but right now, the number two cause of death amongst teens is suicide. Suicide is the second most common cause of death in teenagers across the world. And the number one cause is accidents due to drug abuse and so on. So obviously, these two are linked to each other. So that's why I think this conversation is very crucial. What does it mean to be part of a civil society? And what does it mean to embark on what Chirag referred to as the soul of leadership? I've been teaching a course called the Soul of Leadership for about 15, 20 years at Kellogg Business School. And then I also taught the same course at Columbia University and occasionally at Harvard. And thought leaders and influencers from all over the world came to the course. And yet I feel right now we're still in a global crisis of leadership. So as I reflect on my years growing up in India, and I was very young, and as a little boy before my teen years, my father, who was in the British Army, would tell me about World War One, about the about World War Two, about the horrors of World War Two, about the Holocaust, about millions of people that died in World War Two, about the atomic bomb, which incinerated more than 500,000 people in a few seconds, in less than a minute. So how could we call that a civil society? And then I look back beyond my father's times and my grandfather, who was a participant in the First World War, a colonial British Empire. And it was the same: trenches, pandemics, disease, warfare, terrorism, cruelty. So you keep going back in history. And you see, when was there a time where there was a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world? And the answer is there never was a time. Human history is plagued with warfare, cruelty, injustice, racism, bigotry, gender inequality, abuse of women, children, going back to medieval times. There's never been a society, maybe a few years in Ashoka's time, after a terrible war anyway, maybe a little bit in Buddha's time, but these were regional pockets of peace and very transient. So, is there hope for humanity? And I think I'd rather not use the word hope because hope immediately implies despair. You only have hope when there is despair. So, what I would like to say is there a realistic solution for humans to create a real civilization, a real civil society, with all the things I've mentioned? And we have to be realistic. If we keep our medieval minds and combine that with modern technologies like nuclear weapons, cyber warfare, and everything else that we have today, mechanized death with drones, and all the ways we have creatively uh, embarked on uh, mechanized death, then is there a hope? And I would say that if we don't have that, then we are sleepwalking to extinction. With everything I've said and the modern capacities that we now have, we are sleepwalking to extinction. For a person who's 78 years old, that last chapter of my life, it actually doesn't even matter. There are 2 trillion galaxies, we are told, 700 sextillion stars. And right now, if you believe the current science, there are 60 billion probable habitable planets in just the Milky Way galaxy. And this is estimated with these new telescopes like the James Webb telescope, which will look for biospheres in other intergalactic space beyond our solar system. If a planet is too close to its sun, it's too hot, and no life as we know it. If a planet is too far away from its sun, no life as we know it, too cold. But there are other factors that determine the possibility of life, like the electromagnetic to gravitational ratios, some things called the cosmological constants. But with all that mathematical precision, it is believed now, currently believed by most scientists, that there might be 60 billion habitable planets in just the Milky Way galaxy. About a month ago, I did a conference at Harvard with some astrobiologists who look for life in other planets, and that's the current consensus. So, if our planet is one of 60 billion habitable planets in the Milky Way galaxy, you multiply that by 2 trillion galaxies, then our planet is not even a grain of sand, not even a grain of sand in all the beaches and all the deserts of this planet. So, if tomorrow we sleepwalk to extinction because of our lack of understanding reality, then I don't think the universe would notice. It would be obvious that the human species was an interesting experiment that did not work. 1 grain of sand on that planet, one species called Homo sapiens, that is causing all this havoc and destruction. So, before I go on to talk about the soul of leadership, let me share with you a story that goes back to when I was about 9 years or 10 years old. So, I was born in 1946, and the year that I'm speaking about is 1954. I was about 8 years of age, and my father was an army doctor, and we lived in a town in the center of India called Madhya Pradesh. The town was called Jabalpur, and it was a small town. And in our newspapers, there was a lot of excitement because Pandit Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India and the heir to Mahatma Gandhi, was going to visit our little town, and he was going to open the first automobile factory in Jabalpur. year is 1954. And the first automobile factory produced something called Tata Mercedes Benz Shaktiman trucks. And so our entire town was excited. And in our family, uh, in addition to me, my little brother, who was then 5 years old, he is currently a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and the former dean of education at Harvard Medical School. Me, my little brother, my father, my mother, there was only one conversation every day at our uh, dinner table, and that was how excited everybody was that Pandit Nehru was coming to our city. And my mother could not obsess over one thing. She kept asking my father, what kind of sari should I wear? And for the occasion. And my father would actually laugh at her and say, there are going to be millions of people on the street. Mr. Nehru is not going to notice the color of your sari. So, anyway, the day arrived when Mr. Nehru's motorcade passed by the street, uh, which was in front of our house. My father, with his army uniforms and World War II um, uh, badges and medals and so on, my mother in a beautiful silk sari, my little brother and I in our school uniforms, we lined up the streets of Jabalpur at about 5 o'clock in the morning. The motorcade wasn't coming till 9. And by the time we approached 9 o'clock, there were millions of people on the street. And when I say millions of people in India, if you've been to India, this generation, you know that in India, when you say millions, it means millions. It doesn't mean hundreds of thousands. It literally means millions. So the sea of humanity, people on window ledges, people on treetops, people on each other's um, shoulders, people on buses, all waiting for the motorcade to arrive. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mr. Nehru's motorcade turned the corner of our street and started to come towards where we were sitting. And the whole crowd went crazy. Long live Nehru, long live India, etc., etc. And then I recall this now in slow motion. The motorcade was very simple. Mr. Nehru was standing in a jeep wearing a white, what we now call Nehru jacket, a red rose in his coat lapel. That was his brand, his signature, if you want to call it. And the Jeep had one driver in the front and a motorcycle in the front, motorcycle in the back. So not a fancy motorcade, simple. And then as the Jeep approached where we were, and I swear to God, this is true, and not just a faint memory because it was such a striking experience. Uh, in all the millions of people that were there, Mr. Nehru's eyes glanced upon my mother, and he took his rose off and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped and stepped back, except for my mother, who stepped forward like a queen, picked up the rose, looked at my father, and said, Daddy, what did I tell you? Now let's go home. And in that moment, I realized that my mother was the leader in our family and that she had something very magical about her, even though my father was a great leader and, was honored by British colonial empire and so on. In any case, we went home and my mother emptied one room, which used to be our library. And then in the middle of the room, she placed a table, on the table, a vase, and the red rose with a little water in the vase. And then for the next 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. It was the talk of the town. And when they came to our house, and they would take off their shoes. They would tiptoe into this room and they would look at the rose in silence. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade, and my mother had a party where she invited the exact number of guests that the rose had petals. And at the end of the party, everybody got one faded rose petal. And you should have seen how people accepted that rose petal. You would think it was a family heirloom or a diamond or some precious jewel. In any case, after this whole episode, I asked my mother, I said, what was so special about those rose petals? And she said something which never left me. And she said, they represent the soul of India. I said, that's a very alien concept. I remember I was 9 years old. I had no idea what a soul was or what the soul of India meant further. So I asked her, what's a soul and what is you mean by the soul of India? And she reminded me that India had been enslaved for 200 years under British colonialism. And it was Mahatma Gandhi who was responsible, along with other great luminaries and thought leaders and visionaries, including Mahatma Gandhi, but many, Vallabhbhai Patel and Pandit Nehru, who brought India freedom after 200 years of enslavement and without any violence. And so, what that rose petal represented were the longings, the aspirations, the goals, the dreams, and those desires of an entire collective consciousness. And so when people looked at Mr. Nehru's rose, they were reminded of this story of 2,200 years of enslavement and freedom and vision. Today, many of you, your parents and probably your grandparents come from schools like IIT and AIMS and many other amazing institutions in India. And that was all a 100-year vision at the dawn of India's independence, at the dawn of India's freedom. And so that is the basis of this course that I've taught now for about 20 years, the soul of leadership. And I would think a leader is a symbolic soul of a group identity, whether that group identity is a small family or a community or an institution such as yours, the Heartfulness Institution, or it could be a nation, or for some people, it could be the whole world. That leader as a symbol represents the collective longings, the collective aspirations, the collective dreams, and the ability to actually harness the greatness that is inherent in everyone, the greatness inherent in everyone to be the symbolic soul that can actualize the dreams of humanity and help create a more civil, a more just, a more sustainable, a more peaceful, a more healthy, and a more joyful world ultimately. It hasn't happened, although there have been attempts in the past. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela. You can name a lot of people through history who made attempts, but there were always regional successes, but nothing that happened on a global scale. But today we have the opportunity because we have something called the internet, we have something called AI, we have the ability to actually create mass movements and that we didn't have before. So let's go over the basics of the soul of leadership. If I have sent a slide with an acronym which outlines the seven elements of the soul of leadership. Uh, Chirag, do you have the slide? You can just put it on the side if possible.
We're
I
just
saw,
sharing it right now.
yeah, just put it on the side so people can look at it. We don't need it actually, but it'll be good to have it on the side.
It's up there now.
Okay, it's up there now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
good. So as you see, the slide is spells out the word leaders, and that's the acronym for the soul of leadership. And let's look at each of those letters. Okay, let's look at each of the letters. L stands for look and listen. And it's a deep looking and listening that is needed to create a vision. Look and listen with your body. Look and listen with your heart, because your heart has intelligence. Your heart has neurons, which are very similar to the neurons in your brain. And your heart is a thinking organism. And since you're all so adept in heartfulness, I would assume that you know how to harness the intelligence of your heart by deep listening with awareness in your heart. But also your body, your whole body is like a cosmic computer. It eavesdrops on everything that's happening around you perceptually. And then after you looked and listened with your heart, you look and listen with your mind afterwards, post meditation, not during meditation, not before meditation, but post meditation. You analyze what you have heard, what you have listened to. This is the basis of all revelation. The Upanishads were downloaded like this. Shrutis and Smritis and all the books of revelation in all the spiritual and religious traditions are basically creating a vision through revelation. Revelation means revealed truth. It's not analytical truth. It's the revelation that happens to the luminaries and the sages and the rishis of antiquity in all traditions, whether it's Jesus Christ or the sages of the Upanishads or Muhammad or whoever you want to think of, Sufi leaders like Rumi, they literally downloaded the fundamental truths of the universe, which are not available to us through the rational mind. So once you create that vision, then you share that vision with those who are interested in that vision. You share that vision. Today, social scientists are talking about something called emergence. And emergence happens when there's shared vision, number one, where there's maximum diversity of thought leaders, but maximum diversity of gender, maximum diversity of race, maximum diversity of storytellers, maximum diversity of humanitarians, maximum diversity of people in the education field, and maximum diversity these days of technology and scientists. So, once again, shared vision, maximum diversity. That's the second step. The third step is complementing everyone's strengths. Maximum diversity means everyone has unique abilities and talents and creativity. So complementing everybody's strengths, like a good sports team, like a good soccer team or a football team or whatever, basketball team in India, cricket team. Anyway, maximum diversity, shared vision, complementing each other's strengths, and then creating a sangha, a community where there is a spiritual and emotional bond. I see that the heartfulness community is like a sangha. And this is not a new idea, by the way, even though social scientists are talking about it. The idea is very ancient. In Indian spiritual traditions say you can solve any problem if you have sangha, community, seva, which is service, and sadhana, which is spiritual practice and meditation. That's it. The Buddhists have different words for it. They say, take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in the Sangha, and take refuge in the Dharma. But all coming to the same thing. Okay. So that's the first step. Look, listen, create a vision. The second step, as you see the acronym, E. E stands for emotional intelligence. Because although we all think of ourselves as rational beings, we are creatures that are triggered and and ruled by emotions and feelings. We pretend to be rational, but we are triggered by emotions. And that's because our emotional brain is wiser and actually older in evolution than our rational brain. The rational brain, which is the cerebral cortex, is only 4 million years old. And it grew explosively with the advent of language, which is about 40,000 years ago, when we had something called the cognitive revolution. So, about 40,000 years ago, we diverged from other species. Homo sapiens diverged from other species who had a primitive language only for food calls, mating calls, and danger calls, because that's how all animals survive: food, sex, and danger. If we didn't have that, there wouldn't be any propagation of species. But then, one species, which is us, we created a language for telling stories. In fact, there's a phrase now called to be human is to have a story. And those stories also created models of reality, models of reality. Money is a model of reality. There was no such thing. We created money. We created exchange. We created Wall Street. We created colonialism. We created empires. We created latitude, longitude, Greenwich Mean Time. Everything that we talk about today is a construct of language. And the human species is different from all other species in that it creates models of reality. And with that, we've gone beyond the what I would call the hunter-gatherer age, although most of us still behave like hunter-gatherers. But we had the agricultural revolution, we had the industrial revolution, the scientific revolution, which is about 500 years old. In the last 100 years, we had the technology revolution. In the last 3 decades or so, we had the internet, and now we have AI, all as a result of language models. In fact, that's what we call AI, large language models that can access any kind of language, not just narrative, but biological language, the language of physics, mathematics, anthropology, religion, history, you name it, we now have access. Notwithstanding that, we are still ruled by our emotions because our emotional brain goes much longer. Our rational brain, the cerebral cortex, is, as I said, 4 million years old in evolutionary time. The emotional brain, sorry, is 4 million years old, but the emotional brain is 100 million years old, and the reptilian brain is 300 million years old. So we are creatures ruled by instincts and emotions. But now we understand that there's something called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is when you feel connected to life. When you're disconnected to life, then you probably have had trauma. And trauma is universal. I'm not talking about big traumas like the wars and the Holocausts and all the tragedies that humanity has faced, but even childhood trauma, sexual trauma, physical trauma, um, psychological trauma, emotional trauma. And when people experience trauma, then they have anger. Anger is the memory of trauma, feeling disconnected. Hostility is the desire to get even. Blaming yourself is guilt, shame. And the depletion of energy that happens with all this anxiety is depression, which is now the pandemic of our time. So, how do you heal our emotions and trauma? And the great spiritual traditions have said by getting in touch with your own emotions, by getting in touch with the emotions of others, feeling the emotion of others, which we call empathy. Children are born with natural empathy. If you kick an animal in front of a child, the child will cry, the child will wince. If you're cruel, the child feels pain viscerally. So, empathy is feeling what others feel. And empathy can lead to compassion, which is the desire to alleviate suffering. And when we have compassion and the desire to alleviate suffering, the paradox is even though we are alleviating another person's suffering, we feel our own suffering decrease. And so compassion ultimately leads to what we call love, and love leads to joy and peace and equanimity, and ultimately even the loss of the fear of death. Because love is not a pure emotion, it's the ultimate truth at the heart of creation, where subject and object are entangled in a deeper reality where we are all experiencing oneness with the source of all creation, which some spiritual traditions call God or the divine, in yoga, pure consciousness or ultimate reality, doesn't matter. But love is the ultimate truth, as Rabindranath Tagore, the Indian sage poet, said, love is not a mere emotion, it is the ultimate truth at the heart of creation. And that is the only thing that heals. But love is meaningless if there is no action. And if there's action without love, then that's also irrelevant. But love in action works miracles. And that is what the yogic traditions call karma yoga. Karma yoga is love in action. Love without action, meaningless. Action without love is irrelevant. But love brings you closer to the divine. And these emotions in Buddhist traditions and Indian traditions are called divine emotions: empathy, compassion, joy, equanimity, and love. So, harnessing emotional intelligence actually regulates your body as well. You regulate your body, you regulate the body of those you are engaged in, you regulate their emotional and limbic brain. And now we have a science for it. It's called limbic resonance, regulation, and limbic revision, which means that emotional intelligence actually rewires your neural networks, something we call neuroplasticity, that is triggered by epigenetics, genes that regulate the activity of the genes in the direction of healing, self-regulation, and homeostasis. So that's the second part of the soul of leadership: emotional intelligence. The third part of emotional intelligence is expanding our awareness. Now, if you're a little familiar with yogic philosophy, you've probably heard of the seven chakras. And the seven chakras are actually metaphors or states of biology that link consciousness to our biological responses. So a while back, I wrote a book called How to Know God, where I linked these seven biological responses to human behaviors. Let's go over them one by one. So the first biological response is called the fight or flight response, which corresponds to the first chakra. The first chakra is about survival, and we need it in terms of, when you're in danger, you need the fight flight response, especially in historical times when we were in the jungle. If we didn't have the fight or flight response, then we would surely be good meal for a tiger or a lion. So we survived because of the fight or flight response, which metaphorically is the first chakra. The second chakra is what I would call the reactive response. The reactive response is the ego based response, which says, I must win at all costs. I must win through being manipulative. I must win by being nice but manipulative. Or I can win if I'm nasty and manipulative. Or I can win by being stubborn and manipulative. Or I can win by being playing the victim and manipulative. Look at all the leaders of the world right now, and you'll see that they're experts in the fight, flight, and ego responses. They promise you that they will win for you by being nice, by being nasty, by being stubborn, by playing the victim, and by conquest and predation. So I would say all the havoc that we see in modern civilization is these first two chakras, and not because they're not needed. The first two chakras are needed for our survival and navigation in what we call the physical world. But when they are out of harmony, they lead to all the dysfunctional that we're seeing in what we call civil society. As we move from the first and second chakra to the third chakra, we sense something that happens when we meditate. And that is called the restful awareness response. All of you who are in the practice of meditation know that when you are in that restful awareness state that meditation takes you into, then your body feels calm, your mind feels less turbulent, and you feel that you don't have to be a biological robot that's triggered by people and circumstance into predictable outcomes where there is no freedom. You're at the mercy of every stranger on the street. Somebody says something nasty to you, you're offended for the rest of your life. Somebody says something nice to you, you're flattered for the rest of your life. And there is no independence, period. So meditation allows you to get to the source of all experience. And that I would say is the third biological response. The fourth biological response is what we call the intuitive response. Once you get into that state of meditation, and either before the meditation or after the meditation, you ask questions like, who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? What am I grateful for? Then somehow, this field of pure consciousness, which is a field of infinite possibilities, it gives you the right response at the right moment for what is needed. So there are very fancy Sanskrit terms for it. Ichha Shakti, spontaneous fulfillment of desire. Gyan Shakti, spontaneous knowledge or knowing. And Kriya Shakti, spontaneous right action, which is the right response to every situation as it occurs. And the intuitive response is really far more reliable than anything in the realm of rational thought. It does not have a win-lose orientation. It eavesdrops on the collective consciousness. It is contextual. It is relational. It is holistic. And it harnesses a deeper truth. So that I would say is the third biological response, the third chakra. No, the fourth chakra, right? Fight, flight, reactive, restful awareness, intuitive, the fourth. The fifth response is the creative response. Not only are you eavesdropping on the collective mind, but now you can harness the collective mind to create a new story. Creation or creativity is both a death and a resurrection. It's the death of the old story and the resurrection of a new story. A new story, new way of dealing with relationships, new context, new meaning, new aspirations, going beyond just the intuitive mode into the creative mode. So that creative mode is not just artistic and scientific. That is a fundamental aspect of reality or what we call consciousness. And that I would say is the next biological response, the creative response. Beyond the creative response is something called the visionary response. This is the visionary response, which actually goes beyond individual creativity and has a vision for the collective consciousness. It harnesses what we call archetypes. So in India, we are very familiar with the archetypes. We call them goddesses, gods. And people say, why do you have so many gods in India when there is only one God? Because these gods and goddesses are symbolic representations of the infinite. The infinite is impossible to conceptualize. The infinite is non conceivable. The infinite is beyond all comprehension. So, as humans, we symbolically represent these as archetypes. And these archetypes are represented in religions that gods and goddesses, they are states of energy, they are states of information, they are states of awareness that go beyond the individual mind. When you think of Mahalakshmi or Mahasaraswati or Durga or Shiva or Vishnu or Brahma, you're talking about the symbolic representations of the infinite, but you'll find that these archetypes are present in every tradition of the world. Egypt, the Greek archetypes that talk about Hera, the goddess of power, Demeter, who represents mother energy, Artemis, who represents nature, Aphrodite, similar to what we call Sundari in Indian traditions, who represents beauty, sensuality, sexuality. Artemis, that represents the environment and nature. Athena, which is very similar to Saraswati, represents art, culture, knowledge, science, and today I would say technology. Persephone, that represents the underground, the dark alleys, and the ghostful attics of our unconscious mind. Hestia, that represents mother and also represents homemaker. These archetypes are prevalent in every tradition. And when we harness these archetypes through invocation, through rituals, which are very dominant in Indian spiritual and religious traditions, then we actually harness a bigger power than we can as individual human beings. So that would, I would say, the sixth biological response. And then the seventh biological response is called the sacred response. And in the sacred response, actually, you don't have to do anything. Just the presence of such a sage or such a rishi or such an enlightened being actually brings about healing and self regulation. These seven chakras, therefore, are very important aspects of states of awareness. And as states of awareness expand, then everything changes. Biology changes, perception changes, emotions change, and what we call everyday reality changes. We are in desperate need right now for expanding these responses through rituals, through practices of mindfulness, through inquiry, through self reflection, and through transcendence. There are hundreds of techniques in the yogic literature, in the Brahma Sutras, in the Shiva Sutras, in the yogic texts that allow us to actually expand our awareness in this direction towards what we call enlightenment. So that's the letter A. D stands for dreaming and doing it, because a dream without action is just a dream. But a dream with action actually creates what we call our active everyday reality. So it is great to dream, and it is great to dream collectively, because a dream that you dream alone is your dream, but a dream that you dream with others could become everybody's reality. And that is the reason I'm speaking to you today, is that with all that you have, it is now time to start dreaming collectively for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. But that has to be combined with action, with plans, what I call SMART goals. SMART is another acronym. S stands for stretch more than you can reach. M stands for make everything measurable. A stands for have agreement with your ecosystem of leaders that this is what you want to achieve. R stands for record your progress and set a time limit, which is what T stands for. Smart goals with collective dreams, and you can achieve anything that we call impossible. So that is the letter D. The next letter stands, again, E stands for empowerment. It is time that we all empowered ourselves, not depend on one sage, one luminary, because as humans, we all have the capacity for that empowerment, that true power that comes when we are independent of flattery or criticism, when we feel beneath no one and superior to no one, and when we harness our own fearlessness. And that is empowerment. And today there's a radical movement in the leadership arena on empowerment, especially in areas where women have not been empowered, which I see is the condition globally, even now in the United States and elsewhere. I think we still have a lack of women empowerment in leadership. I'm now on my way to the Middle East. That's why I couldn't be with you, where there is a new movement for women's empowerment. And I think unless we achieve that and harness the divine feminine in our ecosystem, we have not moved beyond the hunter-gatherer age. And so empowerment right now, a radical environment, distributed environment across all genders, across all races, and across all ecosystems is necessary. The next letter R stands for responsibility. Great leaders take responsibility when things go wrong, and they give credit to their team when things go right. But great leaders also know how to take care of their physical and emotional health and help other people achieve physical and emotional health, which means that you respect your body as a field of awareness, that you actually understand that body, mind, and spiritual well being go together when we take deep rest, when we exercise, when we meditate, when we engage in social interactions, when we eat healthy food, when we regulate our biological rhythms, then that's taking responsibility for ourselves and for entire ecosystem of leadership. Now come to the last letter in the acronym, which is called synchronicity. So over the years, I have interviewed amazing people, as leaders, corporate leaders, political leaders, spiritual leaders, and many more. I've had the privilege of meeting Mother Teresa, the privilege of meeting Nelson Mandela, the privilege of interacting with Mr. Obama, Bill Clinton, and others. Not that I would say they all exemplify the best leadership, but they do exemplify some qualities of good leadership. And one of the things that they always said to me when I asked them, how did you become such a great leader? And they would say the usual things. I went to a good school, I worked hard, I had exacting plans, I was disciplined, um, I was lucky to have a good education. But in the end, they always say one of the following things. If they're religious, they say, God was on my side. If they're spiritual, they say, it seemed like a state of grace. If they are secular, they say, there were a lot of meaningful coincidences, or I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or sometimes, if they're familiar with Jungian psychology, they say there was a lot of synchronicity. So that's my favorite word. Synchronicity is when all the elements and forces of the universe somehow come together to activate your intention. You can call it whatever you want: divine grace, having the support of the laws of nature, or God, or synchronicity, or meaningful coincidence, or just call it good luck. It doesn't matter. Good luck is opportunity meeting preparedness. And so, what I've given you today are the tools that give you preparedness. But then around you are opportunities all the time. Every adversity is an opportunity. Every adversity is a challenge. Every adversity is an opportunity to elevate your personal identity from a skin encapsulated ego dragging a body of flesh and bones to a higher being where you have the ability to modulate your biology and your surroundings by harnessing a higher power that is called pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is a field of infinite possibilities, infinite regulation, infinite correlation, infinite creativity, and infinite evolution. So, those are my 7 steps to the soul of leadership. They can be modified to any ecosystem, whether it's a business organization or an ashram or a community or a political organization, although I have least hope in political leaders. But there must be hope, or what's a dream for? I shall stop there and I will ask Chirag uh, to share any questions that you might have or any other questions. Particularly, also, I did not address AI, which is a large language model. And I do believe that AI is going to leapfrog our biological, cultural, and social evolution to an era that we have never imagined. I look back at history when between the years 1888, I believe, and 1906, 88 to 1906, which is what, 12 plus 6, 20 years. 20 years, humanity discovered the light bulb, automation, aviation, and the telephone. So if you had died in, say, 1885, and you were born in 1906, the world you entered would be totally radically different from the world you left. And I'm suggesting to you that we are now entering an era with AI that will leapfrog our social and biological evolution to a new species. We will not be humans anymore, but meta-humans. And that's the subject of another book I have written called Meta-Human. So, okay, finally I stop. Go ahead.
Well, Dr. Chopra, thank you so much. Could we all have a round of applause for... It was wonderful to just hear about your leaders framework, and I think gives us a lot to think about and hopefully dream together during the next half of the program. Before we get into the relaxation and meditation, one question that would be great for you to expand upon with relation to AI is, what impact do you see AI having on our ability to become more spiritually able? Right, so I know you have a book coming out on this as
It's
well.
out, it's here.
Oh, it's out. Great.
Okay, it's called Digital Dharma: How AI Can Elevate Spiritual Intelligence and Personal Well-being. Okay, so the book is out, and I explained to you earlier that all of human civilization has been the result of creating models of reality. If you didn't know latitude, longitude, Greenwich Mean Time, whatever, money, there wouldn't be a civilization as we know it. Okay. So large language models have taken this to the next step. Okay, because they can harness biological language, the language of physics, the language of mathematics, the language of spirituality, religion, anthropology, history, learn from what we did right, what we did wrong. So essentially, Chirag, what distinguishes the human species is language, but also the fact that we are tool makers. We discovered fire. If we hadn't discovered fire, there wouldn't be the steam engine. If we hadn't had the steam engine, we wouldn't have the industrial age. If we hadn't had the industrial age, we wouldn't have the age of technology. AI is the latest technology. And so technology is something that humans have dabbled into since the Stone Age. Okay. And it gets better. Every time there's a new innovation. And I remember when the computer came out, I took a computer to India to give it to my father as a gift. And I showed him the computer. I said, this is how you use it. This is how you do email. And this is what you do. 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail where my father had printed out the email on on his the printer I had given to him. Then he mailed the letter to me in the post and saying this email is fantastic. So this is how big a leap that was. What we're seeing a leap right now is beyond our imagination. So what I did in my book is I said I can't expand on AI and all its ramifications because they are beyond an individual mind. How can I harness AI for four things? Number one, for personal and for personal well-being, basically, for personal well-being, mental, physical, etc. Number two, how can I harness AI as a health coach? You know, Number three, how can I harness AI as a research assistant? And number four, how can I harness AI as a spiritual guide? Because we have a lot of wonderful gurus and teachers in the world, but with the AI, I can also go back to history. I can go back to the sages of the Upanishads. I can go back to the luminaries of antiquity. I can go back to what Kashmir Shaivism said, or Vedanta said, or what the yogic tradition said, or Zen Buddhism said. And so now, not that AI will make me more spiritual, only you can make yourself spiritual, but it can give you a map. But always remember, the map is not the territory. The territory is the actual experience which you have in a Sangha. But a map is good to have. If you go to a restaurant with the menu, you can't eat the menu, but it will at least tell you what you might want to eat.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dr. Chopra. And we'll be transitioning to relaxation and meditation now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me and have a wonderful meditation. Take care.
Thank you. So now we'll transition into relaxation and then followed by meditation.